Hey, what's going on everyone? Greg here, and if you've been a longtime viewer of the channel, or even if you're new to the channel, I made a video earlier this year, in fact, I think it was in January of 2019, titled The iPod Touch in 2019, Why Does Apple Still Sell This? And in that video, I said that the iPod Touch hasn't been updated since 2015, and the next time Apple mentioned this product, it would probably be to cancel it, and that this was the last version of the iPod they would be selling. And to my surprise, Apple released another iPod Touch. Yes, they actually updated the iPod Touch in 2019, so that kind of invalidates my entire video on the previous generation of iPod Touches. However, that video was pretty popular, and even though I questioned the existence of the iPod Touch in 2019, I got a lot of feedback, especially I think from a younger audience who still uses iPods. But here we are, iPod Touch in 2019, brand new, so let's rewind back a bit and unbox it. Okay, and here we have the packaging of the iPod Touch. Now, as you can see, if you've ever purchased the previous generation of iPod Touches, the packaging on this is exactly the same. In fact, my box was pretty poorly packaged when I got it, with only one side of tape that looks like it was hastily put on, not what you would usually expect from Apple. Or maybe Apple actually went ahead and took all the old iPod Touches they had lying around and opened each one of them up, putting all the new components inside of it, rather than manufacturing new shells, because they probably had a few sitting around. So obviously we really don't have to rip open any tape, it's practically been opened for us, so we can see that we have the iPod Touch right here. Now, one of the things that did change is that they updated the sticker on the front of the iPod Touch to include the latest icons from iOS 12. Now inside we get documentation as we would expect for any Apple product, but this looks to be like an updated documentation for the latest 2019 iPod. We also find documentation for Product Red because this is a Product Red iPod Touch, and this is actually the first Product Red device I've ever owned from Apple. Also in the box is a Lightning to USB cable. Now the iPod Touches don't come with their own power brick, so forget fast charging the iPod Touch, you don't even get an included 5-watt power adapter. We also get a pair of Apple earbuds in the box, and as we put that all aside, we now have the iPod Touch in its Product Red glory. Okay, so of course I have powered on this device already, and I've been playing with it for a little while now. So let's talk about the design of the iPod Touch, because it's still very much the same design that we're used to. In fact, it's the same design iPod Touch as the one from 2015. So we still have that classic 4-inch form factor that older iOS devices used to have, like the iPhone 5 and 5S, and of course the iPhone SE. Unfortunately, no new bezel-less design, so this still has a pretty big forehead and chin. One thing that's very different from the iPhone 5 to the iPod Touch is just how thin and light this device is. If you compare the iPod Touch to any of the other iPhones out there, it is thinner than all of them. And especially coming from the 2019 era of the giant XS Max with that stainless steel body, the iPod Touch feels super slim and super lightweight. On the back, you can see that nice anodized red aluminum. The red iPod Touch is really striking. This is a really nice color. If you're in the market for an iPod Touch and you're having trouble on deciding on the color, definitely pick up the red. It is super nice to look at. In the top right, you'll notice some black plastic. That is to let the Wi-Fi and Bluetooth signal pass through. You'll also see the addition of an 8-megapixel camera that hasn't been updated since 2015. Let's just say it takes pictures, and yeah, if you have ideal lighting conditions, you can probably take an okay picture, but if you're in any sort of bad low light area, this isn't really gonna cut it. On the bottom of the device, you'll notice a lightning port for charging, a small little speaker on the bottom that doesn't sound all too great, and then of course a headphone jack. This is an iPod, so it is music oriented, so you can plug in any 3.5mm headphone jack right into your iPod. Now, I don't know if you caught this yet, but one glaring omission from the iPod Touch is the fact that even in 2019, Apple still hasn't added any sort of biometric security to this. So forget even them adding Face ID to the iPod Touch, they neglected to even include the Touch ID sensor, so it's still just a regular old home button, meaning you will have to input a passcode if you have it password protected. As for the display, it is the same 4-inch display from the 2015 model. meaning that there's no updates like a wide color gamut or even Apple's True Tone display technology. Although it still has a pixel density of 326 pixels per inch, so it is still a Retina display, so things like text still look sharp. In no way is this as good as a modern iPhone display, but I've seen way worse, and this is definitely passable for a $200 device. Now, as I mentioned before at the start of this video, there were two big changes to the 2019 iPod Touch. The first being that you can now get the 256GB storage option, and the second being that Apple swapped out the chip from an A8 chip to an A10 Fusion. If we run a benchmarking app like Geekbench, we can see that we get a single core score of 2,704 and a multi-core score of 4,690. This score is actually a little bit lower than what I was expecting to see. If you notice, the iPhone 7 still outscores it despite having the same chip. Now, I'm not sure if my iPod Touch is still setting up. It was very hot as I was handling it because I was downloading all of my applications back onto this device, as well as things like syncing my photos. So this Geekbench score might not be entirely accurate. I will have to retest it later on when this device is finished setting up. So maybe the score might be higher, or Apple decided to underclock the A10 processor inside of this device. Now, when I said there were two changes to the iPod Touch, I did kind of leave out one minor change, and that was that the old iPod Touch only had 1GB of RAM in it, and this new 2019 iPod Touch bumps that up to 2GB. As for real-world usage, the iPod Touch felt fine to me. Scrolling was incredibly smooth, and I noticed no slowdowns even while the device was setting up. Typing was also super responsive, although I admit going back to typing on a 4-inch screen is really hard when you're used to something like the iPhone XR or the iPhone XS Max, but if you trust the autocorrect system, it usually works out for you. Now, on Apple's website, they highlight that the inclusion of the A10 chip inside of the iPod Touch does open it up to newer abilities. So now you can use things like group FaceTime where you couldn't use that on the older iPod Touch. You can now also use ARKit applications, which was also not possible on the A8 processor. Another highlight on Apple's website is that this iPod Touch with an A10 chip inside of it will open it up to be able to play more games. Now, when I used the 2015 iPod Touch in 2019, I tried to load up modern games like Fortnite and Civilization 6. So will this iPod Touch with an A10 chip inside of it load those games? And yes, as you can see, I am loading into Fortnite on the 2019 iPod Touch with its 4-inch display. The drawbacks of the 4-inch display become quickly apparent though, as I see a lot of fuzzy text that is really hard for me to read. However, I am able to load into a game just fine. Performance on the iPod Touch is definitely not as good as something like the iPhone XR or the iPhone XS, but Fortnite is running and I am able to play it. So if you have a kid who isn't quite ready for his cell phone, but maybe they still want to play a game like Fortnite, they can do it on this $200 iPod Touch. Now, I also wanted to see if we could load up Civilization 6 on the iPod Touch. And to my surprise, or maybe not to my surprise, considering it's using an A10 Fusion chip, I was able to get it to run on the iPod Touch. And playing Civilization 6 on this 4-inch screen is really, really hard for me. And even though I am playing Civilization 6 on an iPod Touch, it doesn't feel like I really should be able to. But it does run, although I don't know if I could ever finish a game like this on a 4-inch display. Now, unfortunately, I did just get the iPod Touch, so I haven't had time to test things out like the battery life, although in my short time with it, I am already at 10%, and when I unboxed it, it had a full battery. Now, granted, I've been doing some heavy tasks with it, I've been syncing it up, but I don't think the battery life on this thing is going to be too stellar. Okay, so the iPod Touch is here in 2019. Now, maybe you're watching this video and you're asking yourself, why did Apple update this product when a lot of us thought this was going to be dead in 2019? And I think the answer is actually pretty simple, and that is a few people just still use the iPod Touch. And there's some special use cases for the iPod Touch. Maybe you still want to use it just for music. You don't want to bring your $1,000 iPhone to the gym. You feel much more comfortable bringing a $200 device that if it got lost, if it got broken, if anything happened to it, it wouldn't be a major catastrophe. As I mentioned before in the review, I also see this being a popular device that parents can give to their kids. So if your child isn't ready for full cell phone service, you could purchase them an iPod Touch. They could still feel like they have a phone. They could still have access to things like social media apps, to messaging, to playing games like Fortnite, or to give them to watch YouTube or listen to music or anything that a kid would want to use an iPhone for, but they're not ready for full cell service. Now, the iPod Touch might not be for me. It might not even be for the person watching this video, but it is for someone out there, and I'm glad that Apple decided to at least update it with a more modern processor rather than still selling the 2015 version. Alright everyone, thank you so much for watching this video. If you liked the video, make sure you give me a like. If you want to see more from my channel, make sure you're subscribed. If you want to buy the iPod Touch and support the channel, make sure you check out the links in the description. Also, I'm not really sure if I'm going to do a more full, in-depth review of this iPod Touch. This is a shorter time than I would normally spend with the product, but I really didn't think there were too many updates to cover. However, if you would want to see a more in-depth or a longer review after I spent more time with this product, make sure you let me know in the comments below. Thank you again for joining me, and I will see you all in the next video. Take care, everyone.